Case 1. Kelly Lynn Watson, died the 13th of October, 1983. Kelly Watson was a 21-year-old woman when she was strangled to death. She had secured herself a bright future, having recently graduated from the University of Colorado in the USA. Her boyfriend, Keith Patrick Brown, was put on trial for her murder. The jury retired to make their verdict on Friday the 13th of April, 1984. The 13th of October, 1983, a Thursday, was an extremely unlucky day for Kelly Lynn Watson, but Friday the 13th of April, 1984 was exceedingly fortuitous for Keith Patrick Brown, as the jury reached a decision, within 24 hours, of not guilty. Moreover, there was no subsequent appeal by the state. Brown's relationship with Kelly had been trundling along for 3 years. The 14th of October would have been their third anniversary. Kelly had received a diamond from Brown in 1982 after they had discussed marriage and he had proposed. He regularly sent her flowers to the extent that Kelly's family called him Lance Romance, an American slang terminology for a boy who is putting in overtime with a girl. The prosecution claimed that Brown's perspective of the relationship was that he had a perfect fiancée, who would fit perfectly into his life plan. However, they had a witness who contradicted that outlook from Kelly's point of view. Kerry Moen, one of her ex-sorority sisters, alleged that Kelly was on the verge of permanently breaking up with Brown. She was intending to lay it on the line and tell him to stop bothering her. Apparently, she wasn't ready for marriage, and wanted to date other men. In addition, Brown had received anonymous letters, one informing him that Kelly intended to spend what would have been their third anniversary at a square dance in the company of another man. The second letter stated, "The end is near, soon our goal will be accomplished and you will both be broken up." Brown had a notebook in which he had written, "Kelly out all night, and the end is near," which he claimed referred to the anonymous letters. Conversely, the defense had an ex-roommate of Kelly's who testified that the relationship was patty perfect, which implied everything was decidedly well with them. So, it isn't entirely clear whether Kelly was bent on extricating herself from her tryst with Brown. Brown's account of the night of the murder was thus: he and Kelly had driven to Chautauqua Park, in Boulder, Colorado. Although in a residential area, the car park would be dark at night. Brown claimed while they were canoodling, a car drew up behind them, flashing its lights. Following this, there was a knock at the window, and two men forced their way into the car. One man got in the passenger seat, the other in the back with Kelly. The couple were instructed not to look at the men, or they would be killed. Brown was ordered to drive about 5 miles to the more secluded area near the National Center for Atmospheric Research facility, on the Table Mesa Road on the outskirts of Boulder. When the car stopped, Brown was pulled from the car. Hearing Kelly screaming, Brown swung punches wildly at the man, whereupon Brown was knocked unconscious. He had no recollection of what had happened next. He did give a vague description of one of the men. At 2:20 a.m., a security guard from the N-car facility discovered the two inside the car, with the engine idling. The doors were locked and the windows closed. There was a green garden hose attached to the exhaust pipe, which had been fed through the rear hatch into the passenger compartment. Both victims had shoelaces tightly tied around their necks. As the guard cut away the laces from around Brown's neck, Brown abruptly sat up, screaming, "You bastards!" The post-mortem revealed an unexpected finding. Kelly had died due to strangulation, not from carbon monoxide poisoning. Brown was found with a bloody nose, a swelling on his forehead, by his right eye, and a set of 3 scratches on the right side of the jaw, about 2 to 3 inches in length. His blood was found on Kelly's sweatshirt. More footmarks made by Kelly's tennis shoe were on the inside upper right section of the windscreen, on the passenger side. More of Brown's blood was found on the dashboard console, and his own sweater and shirt. He was not wearing this sweater. It was found in the passenger side footwell, with a partial footprint that was similar to Kelly's tennis shoe, on its front side. Behind the car, Brown's watch, ring, and a button torn from his shirt were found. His wallet was found in the car, but the credit cards were missing. One of these cards was recovered from a resident's dustbin, close to Chautauqua Park. A print on that card could not be identified. Strangely, the only prints found on the outside of the car were Brown's thumbprints, above the handles of both of the car's doors. The police did not find his account credible, so he was charged with first-degree murder. Brown made an attempt at suicide while on bail, by using a razor blade to inflict a deep cut to his left wrist, but it was not determined to be a serious wound. The trial defense lawyer made a request at the close of prosecution to lower the charge from murder to manslaughter, believing it would be a crime of passion at worst. This was denied, though it was acknowledged by the judge to be a close call. Now, this case is relatively recent and the defendant was acquitted by a jury in what seems to have been a fair trial. Also, we do not have all of the details of the case. There are some questions that I would want to ask regarding certain details of Brown's account, which could be significant. I must say, I don't think I have ever heard of a crime quite like this. If we accept Brown's account, what was the motive? Kelly was not sexually assaulted. Why wasn't Brown strangled? And, why strangle someone, apply a shoelace tourniquet, and then go to the trouble of rigging the car to poison the victims by carbon monoxide? Whoever used the garden hose, most probably had premeditation. When the guard discovered the crime scene and released Brown from the car, this could not have been all that long after the setting up of the mock gas chamber, otherwise Brown would not have survived. The guard that found them did not report seeing or hearing any other vehicle. What was Brown's carbon monoxide blood level? Kelly, of course, was already dead, so she didn't have any carbon monoxide in her system to correlate with. There might have been a case for murder-suicide. Manslaughter would not require premeditation for a guilty verdict. Nonetheless, Keith Patrick Brown was found to be innocent of any crime, by a lawful court. I wonder what more modern forensic techniques, including DNA analysis, would have revealed. As things stand, there is no justice for Kelly Lynn. Case 2, William and Isabella Hewitt, died the 28th of December, 1904. An address like 5½ The Crescent, sounds like something out of a Harry Potter story. Sadly, this story is true and far less wholesome. In fact, it has more in common with the infamous Hewitt family murder, known as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is a quainter, though equally heinous crime. Fred Stone was a young apprentice to the gunsmith, whose workshop was in a yard that was accessed between number 5 and 6 The Crescent in York, England. Next to this was a small cottage that was rented to William and Isabella Hewitt. They were a couple in their early 70s. William had recently retired from his occupation of railway mechanic. Isabella would clean up in the gunsmith's shop, probably for a small credit against the rent of the cottage. That Friday morning of the 30th of December, 1904, Fred Stone noticed that the key for the shop had not been moved. This key would have been used by Isabella Hewitt to enable her to carry out her daily tidying up duties, and she had, strangely, not been seen for several days. Stone was concerned for Isabella's well-being, so he crossed the yard and knocked on the Hewitt's door. Despite the curtains being closed, he was able to get a glimpse of the interior. What he saw shocked him to the core. William's body was face down on the floor, and Isabella was lying on the couch with a bloody cloth over her face. There was blood and brain matter splattered all about the place. When a police sergeant attended the scene, he found the cottage door to be locked from the inside, but managed to gain entry through a partially opened window. What he discovered was in every way as horrific as Stone had described. The old couple had been despicably killed. Isabella was laying with the right side of her face savagely smashed in with what was identified as being a large wooden mallet, and her throat slashed for good measure. The probable kitchen knife that the killer used was found wrapped in a rag inside the cottage. She displayed no defensive wounds, so it was inferred she had probably been asleep, possibly passed out from alcohol consumption, when the attack took place. William had suffered a violent beating to the head, probably using the same wooden mallet, which was found hidden in a wash basket. Poor William had cinder ash and mud smeared on his face. His hands had been smashed, probably due to defending himself, or from being stamped on. It was determined that William was initially attacked in the yard, and then his body dragged into the cottage. Both the mallet and knife that were found were blood-stained, but it wasn't possible to prove that the blood derived from William and Isabella. A blood-stained axe that was also found at the murder scene was ruled out as a murder weapon, presumably because it didn't match the wounds inflicted. So, who would want to murder the kindly pensioners? The police enquiries quickly drew their attention to a man known as Harry Hewitt, who had lived with the couple for decades. However, his true relation to them was unknown. He probably assumed the name of Harry Hewitt sometime after 1891, although it's possible that he had been known by that name ever since the Hewitts took him in as a baby. Harry Hewitt was born on the 20th of May, 1869 as Jabez Cecil Brooke. The census records show that he lived with the Hewitts from at least 1871, until at least 1891. Not much is definitively known about him, but his parents were believed to be Edward Brooke and Mary Emily Allen, who was born in 1847. They probably were not married, as it was generally thought that Jabez was illegitimate. It appears that the Hewitts became his custodians in return for monetary reward, or at least, received money for his upkeep. They had no children of their own. It is not known who Jabez's benefactor was, other than some relative, which may or may not have been his father. Neither of his parents can be definitively traced. It does not seem that the Hewitts actually regarded him as an adopted son, always referring to him, officially, as a visitor. Jabez eventually gained employment as a trainee pharmacist. He probably left the Hewitts' guardianship sometime between 1891 and 1901, to live in Castleford. This may have been what prompted the couple to move to a small cottage, and possibly, also because William retired. Given that Jabez was 22 years old in 1891, it is highly likely that whatever money the Hewitts had received for him had been curtailed around that time, especially if he was known to have left the household. It had certainly stopped sometime before 1904. Unfortunately for the Hewitts, Jabez had lost his employment and returned to their home, and retaken up his residence. Except, now there was no money to support him, while the Hewitts were not exactly wealthy. They had a modest income from 2 pensions, amounting to 16 shillings a week. Consequently, at the time of the murder, they were in rent arrears to the tune of more than £14, about 18 months overdue, which is well over £1,000 in today's money. That's a lot when on a fixed income, and represented nearly 20 weeks of that income. Even worse, Jabez was convinced that the Hewitts were still receiving income for him. So, when they attempted to suggest that he should leave, he did not take kindly. In fact, Isabella was so afraid of him that she had taken to sleeping in a shed at night. In April of 1904, Jabez had made threats against the Hewitts following an argument about money. A friend of the Hewitts had warned them that they would get themselves killed. The police considered Jabez to be their primary person of interest. They issued a description to their officers and ordered them to keep a lookout for him. They did not have to wait long. The next evening, following the discovery of the crime, Jabez paid a visit to the cottage, which was being guarded by a constable. He was wearing a brown hat and long overcoat. He headed straight at the constable. After a short exchange, Jabez found himself shackled with police handcuffs. At no point did he question why he was being arrested. Jabez did not intend to confess. In fact, somewhat oddly, he refused to admit or deny any knowledge of the crime, invoking an effective no-comment stance. He was charged with suspicion of willful murder. A hearing was held on the 5th of January, 1905. Jabez was apparently a rather mysterious character. He was described as having a Wild West look and was difficult to read. He chose to remain silent during the few minutes the hearing took. The police did not have any hard evidence against Jabez, it was all circumstantial. The murder trial proceeded, nonetheless. He pleaded not guilty, but deferred his defense. The case for the prosecution was weak, at best. There was only one witness, a William Metcalf, who worked at the station hotel. He passed the entrance to the yard of 5½ the Crescent at about 12:15 a.m. on Thursday the 29th of December, and reported to have heard a cry of "Don't, don't," followed by shuffling noises and a door closing. This had taken place over the 5-minute period Metcalf had decided to hang about in the vicinity, after hearing the cry. He claimed to have seen a man leaving the yard and cross to the other side of the road. Metcalf took no further action until after the crime was uncovered on the Friday morning. His description of the man amounted to, he wore a billycock hat, which didn't give the police much to go on. Other witnesses claimed to have seen Jabez on the day prior to the murders. A John Hobson had bought him a pint of beer in the Sun Inn, at Long Marston. to which Jabez had given Hobson a fancy walking stick in way of thanks. This walking stick had been given to William Hewitt at Christmas of 1903 by his employers, the Eastern Railway Company, as a retirement gift. Others had placed Jabez closer to the murder site during Wednesday and Thursday, most notably a Francis Lawson, who swore that he had known Jabez for 12 years, though Jabez disputed knowing him, alleged that he had crossed paths with him at 6 a.m. on the Thursday in Gale Lane. Jabez apparently asked him for directions to the Hunt Kennels. Lawson's description of Jabez having a scruffy beard, wearing an overcoat and a felt hat, tallied with how Jabez was known to look. However, Metcalfe did not recognize him. Moreover, Gale Lane is on the opposite side of York to the murder scene. There was only one tangible scrap of evidence. A cuff from the shirt Jabez was wearing when he was arrested was found in the cottage, behind the sofa where Isabella's body was found. But there was no way to prove when that had been dropped in that location, given that Jabez was a known frequenter of the cottage. He had some spots of blood on his clothes, which could not be identified as human, let alone belonging to the Hewitts. The examining doctor at the trial asserted that William Hewitt had received 11 blows to the head, before being dragged into the cottage, where Isabella was bludgeoned 5 times, and then her throat was cut. The killer must have escaped through the open window. It was his opinion that this would have taken about half an hour, which therefore excluded the man seen by Lawson. William still had his watch and chain upon him when his body was found, which seemed to rule out robbery as a motive. These flimsy prosecution arguments were easily countered by the defense, who ultimately did a good job. So, it was no great surprise that the jury found Harry Hewitt, aka Jabez Brooke, not guilty. The police did not reopen the case, as they were of the opinion that the perpetrator had already been apprehended. There certainly isn't a lot to work with here. The crime did have a personal element to it, and the only motive that could be presented was Brooke's perceived wrongdoing by the Hewitts. Some details are odd. Why hide the murder weapons inside the cottage where they would easily be found? Unless they were not the murder weapons. It wasn't possible to identify the blood on those articles, so may not have even been human. We would also have to presume that the injuries perfectly fitted those makeshift weapons, and given the apparent singular lack of any kind of forensic expertise employed in this case, this wasn't necessarily a reliable deduction. Escape through the window could have been to buy some time, but I'm not sure that was even necessary. As for the crime not being possible within 5 minutes, well, I think it is possible, albeit a stretch. The killer could have been the man seen by Lawson. Perhaps an altercation took place, the killer left and stewed, before returning and committing the murder. Perhaps Brooke got into an argument with William Hewitt over giving away his special walking stick, then stormed off, only to later return and exact a twisted revenge. It is entirely possible. Why did Brooke return to the cottage, if he was the killer? Perhaps to retrieve the cuff he had lost in the frenzy of the crime. This was, after all, the only evidence that could place him at the scene. It is entirely possible that Brooke had a key to the cottage and could have locked the door from the outside. However, the records do not indicate whether there was a key in the lock on the inside, and if there were, could the door still be locked from the outside? Modern locks generally do not allow for that, but this was 1904. Then again, if it was bolted inside, that would require an escape through a window. Also, had such a key been found on Jabez when he was arrested, this would have figured in the prosecution case, unless he already disposed of it before realizing he needed to return to the cottage. Of course, random murders have always been committed, so a stranger cannot be ruled out. But all things considered, I tend to agree with the police's conclusion. If you are wondering what became of Jabez Brooke, aka Harry Hewitt, after he was released from custody in 1905, well, that is the only real mystery associated with this case. He probably changed his name and left the York area, possibly emigrated. In any event, he disappears from the records, never to be found again. Case 3, 3 rabbit holes that may be connected. This segment is very speculative. It concerns 3 well-known cases from the US, although only one is well known in the UK. They are 1. The Texarkana Moonlight murder case of 5 murders or attacks, between February and May of 1946, on the border between Arkansas and Texas. 2. The Zodiac Killer case of at least 5 murders or attacks, between December 1968 and October 1969 in California. 3. The Colonial Parkway murder case of 8 murders between October 1986 and September 1989 in Virginia. All 3 cases remain unsolved to this day. Only the Zodiac case has any notable number of supposed suspects. The Colonial Parkway case had no survivors and no witnesses at all. If you know anything about these cases, you will know that finding an answer is like trying to find the gold at the end of a rainbow. Just in researching this, I was foolishly drawn into the Zodiac rabbit hole, trying to match any suspects from that case to the other 2 cases. This is very challenging. The biggest problem is that even where there are well-documented suspects, there is little in the public domain that can lead to any kind of conclusion, no matter how speculative. The simple truth is that the real killer, or killers, could be completely unknown. It is even possible that these apparent serial murders are not even all connected, even within each case, let alone across cases. All that said, there is no reason why the same person couldn't be responsible for all 3 cases. Some of the well-known Zodiac suspects, some of whom have been seriously considered and investigated by the US police and FBI, were born early enough to have also been the Texarkana killer. The demographic for the Zodiac certainly allows for that, based on what information is known. The Texarkana case is limited to the first 2 victims' description, which may not be wholly accurate. The Colonial Parkway case has only corpses for evidence, some skeletonized. Some might point out that these cases occurred in different parts of America, but I don't think that means anything. As we do not have a definitive suspect for any of them, there is no reason not to consider one killer moving around the country. There could be other murders that are either unknown, or have just not been connected to any of these cases. America is a really big country. The distance between California and Virginia is over 2,000 miles by plane. But, as each of these cases is separated by 20 years, that doesn't negate a connection. Although, admittedly, these cases could easily prove to be entirely unconnected. So, what would lead to a killer suspending their killing sprees for decades? Many things are possible, not least of all, incarceration. Many serial killers had perfectly normal relationships, or seemingly so, and children too. These family periods in their lives does often coincide with breaks in killing, as their emotional state is more settled. Of course, some continue no matter what. We should not speculate as to why there appears to be large gaps between these cases, unless homing in on a particular suspect. The intent of this segment is simply to draw attention to the possibility of a connection between these cases. To my knowledge, this isn't something that has been openly considered. As an example, the Zodiac proposed suspect Robert Ivan Nichols might be a good candidate, but I think he was just too short to be considered for the Texarkana case. The following is a summary of the known victims of each case and their basic details. All but one was in a secluded area. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders. 1. On the 2nd of February 1946, Jimmy Hollis, 25, and his girlfriend Jeannie Larry, 19, were attacked in their car while it was parked. They were attacked by a man with a revolver, wearing a pillowcase with eye holes, or something similar, described as being about 6 foot tall, with a dark complexion and about 30 years old. Hollis was beaten about the head, Larry was knocked down and sexually assaulted with the barrel of a gun. 2. On the 24th of March 1946, Richard L. Griffin, 29, and his girlfriend, Holly Ann Moore, 17, were found dead in their car. Both were shot in the back of the head outside the car, with a .32 caliber pistol. The killer put their bodies back in the car. It is unclear whether Moore was sexually assaulted, but both victims were fully clothed. 3. On the 14th of April 1946, Paul Martin, 17, and Betty Jo Booker, 15, were both killed outside of their car in separate locations. Martin was shot 4 times and Booker twice, again with a .32 caliber pistol. Their bodies were found 2 miles apart, a considerable distance from their car. Both were fully clothed. 4. On the 3rd of May 1946, Virgil Starks, 37, and his wife Katie, 36, were both shot in their home with a pistol through a window. Virgil was killed, but Katie escaped and survived. It is not clear why this incident is grouped with the others, as it seems somewhat different. No description is available. Katie was shot in the face and was blinded by her own blood. The Zodiac Killer. 1. On the 20th of December, 1968, David Arthur Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, were shot dead outside of their car. Faraday was shot in the head, while Jensen was shot 5 times in the back as she attempted to escape. 2. On the 4th of July, 1969, Michael Reno Mago, 19, and Darlene Elizabeth Furin, 22, were both shot in their car. The attacker fired 7 shots through the windows. Furin died in hospital, but Mago survived. He described the man as white, 26 to 30 years old, about 200 pounds and 5 feet 8, with brown curly hair. Given the circumstances, this description may not be that accurate. 3. On the 27th of September, 1969, Brian Calvin Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Ann Shepard, 22, were attacked in broad daylight by the side of Lake Berryessa. They were tied up and repeatedly stabbed. Hartnell survived, but Shepard died in hospital. The killer walked 500 yards to write a message on the side of Hartnell's car. He was described as white, 5 feet 11 and 170 pounds. He had a .45 caliber pistol and wore a black executioner-style hood, with clip-on glasses over the eye holes. 4. On the 11th of October, 1969, Paul Stinn, 29, a taxi driver, was shot in the head by his fare, in a San Francisco street. It is debatable whether this was the Zodiac Killer. The Colonial Park Murders. 1. On the 12th of October, 1986, Kathleen Thomas, 27, and Rebecca Andowski, 21, were killed in their car, by strangulation and slashes to the throat. Both were fully clothed and there was no sexual assault. 2. On the 20th of September, 1987, David Knobling, 20, and Robin Edwards, 14, were both shot to death some distance from their vehicle, on the bank of the James River. It was unclear whether there had been any sexual assault, but some of their clothing was left in the car. 3. On the 10th of April, 1988, Richard Keith Call, 20, and Cassandra Lee Haley, 18, went missing from their parked car. Nearly all of their clothing was found in the car. Their bodies have never been found, but are presumed dead. 4. On the 5th of September, 1989, Daniel Lauer, 21, and Anna Maria Phelps, 18, went missing while driving. Their car was found abandoned. Their skeletonized bodies were discovered about 6 weeks later in a wooded area, covered with a blanket. It was determined at least one had been stabbed. Robbery was ruled out in all cases, with the possible exception of Paul Stinn.